Hello, everyone. Can we get the slides up on there? Yes, great. So thanks for that introduction. And yes, I'm here to talk about parenting through transitions. And the transition that I'm talking about and I'm going to focus on today is kind of twofold. It's going to be up any second now. There we are. Both in terms of parenting through transitions from treatment, off treatment, and back into regular life, and through the transition of adolescence. So I'm going to zoom in on parenting through the teen years, as well as in the situation when after effects are present. There we go. So a very simple sketch of what I want to talk about today is first taking a few minutes to just define some late effects. Second, putting some ideas about typical growth and development out to think about. And then quite simply bringing those two together and talking about the job of parenting in the context of those two challenges. Okay, so late effects defined. Dr. Guger talked about this as well, but just to have a simple definition up, late effects are the physical, neurocognitive, and psychological sequelae of cancer and its treatment. And these interact in complex ways with the developmental process. So the point of this slide really is just to remind you that we're talking about two very complicated processes. Late effects themselves have a developmental course. They change over time. And of course, development is something with multifacets that is also growing and evolving at all times. And now we're talking about the intersection of those two developing and changing systems and how to work with them at once. So we're talking about all these different areas that late effects can come into play in. Those late effects can impact a vast range of systems. Dr. Guger spoke about several of them. And in our practice, we see kids whose late effects profile might look like any combination of the kids you see on the screen here. Dr. Guger spoke about kids who have various challenges in a school setting. And we know that we have kids who have challenges just with mobility and getting around, with joining in with sports activities, with even getting off the couch and re-engaging with life, okay? And of course, various combinations of all those different situations. All right. So that's all I want to say about late effects for now, is this reminder of how complex they are and how varied that field is. And so let's put that on the shelf for a moment. And I want to speak just for a few slides about parenting. So we could do a whole weekend workshop on parenting, of course. I have roughly 20 minutes and about a minute to two per slide. And I have one slide where I'm talking about parenting. So this is, you're about to receive the shortest parenting textbook ever written, right here on this slide. Okay? So here we go. I want to zoom in on that day for a moment, because I think you can extract your parenting textbook from this day. And if your child happened to have been on treatment on the first day of kindergarten, fast forward or reverse to a day that's similar. I'm talking about any first day of anything when you had to prepare your child to engage. All right? That day, you did all the necessary things that parents need to do most of the time. And that is this. The first thing is, you need to make sure your kid is appropriately prepared. And for the first day of kindergarten, that does not mean that they know how to read, that they know their colors, or even that they know their shapes. Appropriately prepared for the first day of kindergarten means your child slept last night so that they can be awake today. Your child is dressed, and it doesn't matter in what. And your child has had some breakfast and maybe has some lunch with them as well. So appropriately prepared means awake, dressed, and fed. That's what we as parents need to do most of the time. We need to bring our kids and make sure they have the very basics. And of course, there are many more ways in which we are sometimes drawn into preparing them. But remember that at its core, really what you need to do is make sure your child is able to function, first and foremost. And the second thing is trying to foster this idea of being open to the experience. And as parents, we do that for the first day of kindergarten in a lot of different ways. We probably talked about older brothers and sisters who went to that school, cousins who went to that school, other kids you're going to see there, and generally maybe even read a book about the first day of school with them. All of those things are done with that spirit of trying to capture a child's attention and interest in this thing that is to come. Because as parents, we want our kids to approach new things with that openness so that they're ready to engage, right? Okay. And then the third bit is to do what matters when you get there. So that's a good one because there's a do what matters, of course, both for parents and for kids on that first day. For parents, it's simple but difficult. Doing what matters means greeting the kindergarten teacher and then saying a warm but clear and firm goodbye and walking away. And that can be extremely challenging depending on your child's temperament, or it can be so easy it's a bit disappointing, and everything in between. And that's what matters for parents to do in that moment. And what matters for kids to do in that moment is the very same goodbye, which may be difficult or hard for them as well, and then a little bit of listening to the teacher, and then smiling back at the kid that smiled at you to start making friends, right? Doing what matters in the moment. Okay. That's my short parenting textbook right there. These are the three things that are really important to focus on. And if you get lost in the details, as it's so easy to do, you can focus back on these things. And I'll come back to this idea at the very end and just touch on it briefly there. Okay, so I admit, that's a short textbook and it's a simple textbook and things do get more complicated, obviously. So let's talk about that a little more. I said I wanted to focus in on adolescence and kind of zoom in on that. So I'll start here with some of the developmental tasks of adolescence. The caption is, "Relax, Ted, it's only a phase." So this is some concepts that we know all adolescents must deal with, challenges all adolescents face. Survivors, non-survivors, all kids. We know teens, one of the things they're doing is getting independence from parents. That's a natural piece of the teenage years. One of the ways kids do that is assimilating more with their peer group. We're all well aware of what that looks like, right? One of the ways that kids do that, or one of the parts of that, is having an increased focus on their body image, being more aware of what they look like and spending more time in the bathroom before school. As everybody who has a kid has noticed. And of course, adolescents are working to establish their identities in various areas. They're figuring out their sexual identity, their ego identities, their vocational identities. They're figuring out who they are. And these are all challenges that every teen needs to face as they go through their teen years. So let's bring it together a little more now, and I want to talk about each of those in terms of what does that look like for your adolescent survivor now as we bring in the kind of the parenting and the survivorship issues together. So adolescent survivors, of course, they have these same tasks. Adolescent survivors also need to find ways to build their independence from their parents. And that can be trickier for them. I often talk to parents about the need, for example, to back off on doing their homework for them, right? That's a concept that most parents can grasp quite easily. Maybe it's hard to actually do, but everybody gets the idea that, yes, I shouldn't do the math homework for them. I need to step back there and allow them the chance to fail. Stepping back and allowing your child the chance to fail when it comes to health issues can be more costly in terms of the consequences. And so, of course, that's an area where adolescent survivors have to do that same task of looking for their own independence and finding it, and it's a little harder for them. It's the same challenge made more difficult. So similarly here, adolescent survivors too are trying to fit in with the peer group. And sometimes there are pieces of their survivorship that make that more challenging. A really simple one would be perhaps a teenage boy has been told by his physicians that he shouldn't play contact sports. And that seems like a minor issue, really, in the field of late effects. You would say, okay, that's really not so bad. But of course, it does complicate this task. Playing on some team, whatever the team is one natural and easy way for a teen to get in with a group of guys and kind of join in with the group. And this makes it harder. Now that option's off the table, and if the kid happened to be a kid who was more sports related, then that's just an added challenge. And of course, there's lots of different ways that that could manifest. Adolescent survivors, too, are becoming more focused on their bodies, right? And they, too, like all of us, need to find a way to be comfortable in their own skin. And of course, lots of our survivors have more noticeable differences from the average teen. And so they have this same challenge of getting comfortable in their own skin, and they have the added difficulty of doing that when maybe a more obvious difference exists than from the average kid. Hi, that's okay. And finally, in terms of integrating all their various identities, the adolescent survivor needs to integrate the identity of patient. What does it mean to be a regular, frequent flyer at SickKids oncology clinic? What does it mean to have this team of professionals that you meet with on a regular or occasional basis? So this slide here, I guess you could take it kind of bad news, good news. For me, it feels like kind of good news. On the one hand, I admit, it looks like I just said everything's harder for your adolescent survivors. And in some ways, that's true. But I guess the other point is, adolescent survivors have the very same jobs to do as every adolescent does. It's not as though they have a categorically different challenge and have to do something that no other teen has faced. In many ways, the things they have to face are more difficult, of course, and I completely acknowledge that. And as parents, I think it's reassuring, I hope it's reassuring that those are challenges that everybody has to face, and they are useful challenges because we all have learned lessons through going through those stages, and adolescent survivors too are going to learn lessons as they go through these stages, even with those added levels of challenge. So to just zoom in on the parent's role again, then, if every parent has to do this, every parent has to juggle some of their kids' temperament, some of their kids' peer issues, some of modern society, etc., to do their job. The parent of an adolescent survivor maybe has to do this, which is pretty much the same job. They have to still juggle these batons and look good doing it. But for the parent of the adolescent survivor, maybe it's a bit scarier, and maybe mistakes are going to hurt a little bit more. But again, my message to you is these jobs are very similar, and all of the tools and knowledge and wisdom we have about general parenting are useful and applicable when we talk about the challenges that parents of adolescent survivors face. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about after effects, and we've talked a little bit about general parenting, and I've tried to bring those together a little bit on that last slide. And now I want to go through a few specific challenges that all parents face during adolescence, and try and bring some wisdom into that about what it means for the parent of the adolescent survivor, and how to navigate that as best you can. So letting go is one of my favorite, I don't know if it's my favorite, one of my most frequent talks with parents. This is something our generation of parents does not do well. We're really bad with this. There's a book, Michael Unger wrote a book, Too Safe for Their Own Good, How Risk and Resiliency Help Teens Thrive. It's about 10 years old. You might remember the McLean spread on the bubble wrap generation. Hover parenting is born from this idea. If you have any doubts about this, the question of whether our generation is doing this more poorly than the last, you might ask yourself, to just take a moment and think about how you were parented in the specific instance, say, of playing at the playground. When I recall as, an elementary school kid playing at the playground, if you just close your eyes and look around the playground, there's no parents there. I'm in the playground alone with a few friends. I have my bike. Maybe there's a ball. That's what that looked like. My son, when he was alone, when he was at the playground after school, there was a row of parents along the wall of the school in at least a 1-to-1 ratio. There was a parent or two there for every kid playing in the playground, right? So then you ask yourself, what would I have lost if I was parented the way I'm parenting? I would have lost the experience of being in the playground alone with my friend, of falling off my bike without someone there to help me with my injury, mild as it was. I would have lost the confidence of finding my way around my neighborhood and knowing I can get where I need to get to, right? And that's indeed what we find, that young adults these days have more of these kinds of challenges. So how an individual child might respond to having less chances for risk as a young person vary, of course, and not every child experiences this. But some of the common profiles are that young adults sometimes find that they are excessively risk-taking to make up for the fact that they haven't had some of the natural risks that perhaps our generation might have as kids. And a great many young adults feel more anxious and depressed when it comes to functioning in the world and a little more hopeless about that. It used to be when I was an undergraduate that the most common reason that university students presented to their university counseling centers was because they broke up with their boyfriend or girlfriend and were sad about that. These days, the most common reason that an undergraduate will present to a university counseling center is because they're just having trouble getting around to their classes and writing their papers and getting them in. Just navigating the world is much more stressful for them around the very same campuses, which tells you that these kids have less experience finding their way home from school, right? Okay. So letting go, my point is, letting go is something our generation is bad at as parents. So forgive yourself a little bit for that, because you're in good company. We're all struggling with this, okay? It is an important thing to do so that our kids can function well. And as parents of survivors, it is naturally going to be more difficult for you, because if your child has been in these situations or had these conditions that are life-threatening and dangerous, of course the natural instinct is to move in, to nurture, and to supervise and assess safety more intensely. So let's move to an example of letting go that's perhaps not so scary, and for the teen will certainly be in your face. Screen supervision. So screens, again, screens are something, I was talking to someone the other day, and I honestly can't think of a parent or a kid that I've met with in the last probably 10 years of my career where the screen issue has not come up. I can dimly remember way at the beginning where screens didn't always come up, but honestly, for the last 10, it comes up always. It's an issue for every kid I talk to, every parent I talk to. So let me give you just a couple points on screens. One is, I do believe it's important that kids learn to use the tools and that we make use of the tools. The tools are fantastic. I love my phone. My son loves his phone. I'm not saying all kids need a phone, but I'm saying we must engage with screens and with technology and have our kids use them and use them well. And certainly, kids who have any manner of limitations in schools can really benefit from some of the tools we have and that are getting better every day. So on the one hand, yes, we must use the tools, and on the other hand, yes, really, we really must set limits on their use. I think when I talk to parents, I think everybody agrees about that. I think everybody agrees there should be limits, but I think nobody knows how to do it. I think we've thrown up our hands a lot and said, oh, my kids know 100 times more than I do about screens. I could never, or it's just kind of, it's as though the screens have just overwhelmed us and our ideas and even our manners about them have not caught up. So of course there must be limits on screens. Of course those limits must be much more limiting when kids are young than when they're old. Young kids, should not have much time on screens. And I believe all of us need to have limits on our screen use to be responsible and balanced humans. Okay, so much of the talk is going to be balancing those two concepts, how to use the screens and how to balance their use. Fair enough. And one idea I can give you about the how is, at all ages, spend a little time on screens with your child. We would not give our kids the keys to the car without having spent some time driving with them or hiring a professional to drive with them. There's almost nothing we do as parents that we hand over without doing together with the child. And yet most parents do that. I think, again, because we feel incompetent about screens. But you don't have to feel incompetent. If you are somewhat incompetent and yet you do want to know a little bit about what your 16-year-old son does on the PS4, just go sit and watch with him. See what the video games really do look like in terms of their violent content. And watch and even, at times cheer them on. And also get a sense of what the games are like. With your younger kids, obviously, it's much easier to spend time with and teach a little bit what's going on with these different websites and help them navigate. When you spend time with, it gives you more of a chance to teach and it educates you in the process about what they're engaging with. Okay, so the point I'm making again is we all need to let go as parents. Our generation's bad at that. And parents of survivors naturally will be more challenged by that. So keep the idea of letting go prominent in your mind as you think about your parenting across your child's childhood and teen years. You're always moving towards some point in around the 18 to 25 range where you're mostly going to be hands-off. So remember, that day is coming, and you need to be gradually moving towards that. Right? A couple other quick slides, because I know I'm short of time, on parenting challenges. I'm just going to mention them and move on. This is true. Growth is uneven. Don't expect it to be even. It's not even. It's not a smooth track up. Kids go 3 steps forward and 2 steps back on all kinds of different things. Again, something I think we do really poorly as a society. We're not living in a balanced way. We work long hours. We now have either 2 parents working or 1 parent at home in a way we have not had in the past. And so having a balanced life that includes good exercise, good homework time, some non-screen, non-structured free time, good nutrition, good sleep, and good screen habits is too many balls to juggle for most families that I talk to. So remember that. You live in a society that's a little messed up on this front. Don't accept that the norm is actually healthy. The norm is not healthy. And of course, that makes it hard to buck the norm, but know that this is a challenge and one that we all need to work on. All right, I want to give a few more minutes to this one than the others, because this is another important one. In another longer workshop that I do on this, we do a whole communication tool and have you practice a whole communication style and activity. We don't have time for that, so I'm going to show you some pictures. So I think every parent of a teen can think of examples like this. Certainly I can. I can think of lots of times when I've tried to communicate with my son when it felt like one of those 2 pictures. And when I talk to parents and ask them about that, those are the examples that come pouring forth, are those examples. Okay? So I'm going to give another little mini parenting textbook moment here. And the point I want to make is, I do not believe that these interactions form the majority of your interactions with your teenager, if you have one, in anywhere near as often as you think they do. We all remember these interactions, and maybe they even comprise a third or approaching half of the interactions, but we all remember these as though they're 99% of the times we talk to our kids. And it's not true. It really isn't true. I would bet if we recorded all your interactions with your child and then rated them, we would find that you were satisfied with the back and forth more than half of the time. And that you were even proud and thought the back and forth was very good or excellent at least 10% of the time. And when I say very good or excellent, I don't mean that your child did exactly what you told them. I'm just talking about communication, not obedience. So by communication, I mean when you said something and you felt like your child heard you and understood what you meant, and then your child said something and you listened and you understood what they meant. That's beautiful. That's what I'm talking about. That 10% of the time at least, I'm sure you've got that. And so what I want you to do right now as a little experiment is I want you to think of one example of that. Because if it's 10% and you've got 1 million interactions with your kid, you've got 100,000 to choose from. So just think of one right now. One example, again, not when they did exactly what you said, but one example of when you felt like the message landed and then you received a message back and it landed with you. And when you've got it, what you'll find is the more you think about that one, the more of those you manage to remember. And that will snowball. And when you are challenged by communication with your child, I want you to go back to that memory of that one time, even if it's one time that was 5 years ago that lasted 30 seconds, I don't care how small it is, I want you to think about that one time. And there's lots of lessons for you in that one time. It will remind you about your state of mind that worked well, your emotional state when you approached your child that worked well, the timing that worked well for your child, all those kinds of things. And the more you focus on that, the easier it will be to redo it. And the more you think about that, the more you'll have it. If you insist on always remembering those two and always talking about those two, even though they do make great cocktail party stories, I know, to your fellow parents, if that's all you think about, then you'll get more of that. Okay? So remember your exceptions. Okay, I think I'm almost done. So if you take one thing from this talk, I would like you to please take my textbook. There it is, the whole thing. This is the job you have as a parent of any kid. And the reason those things are important, it's important that your kid be appropriately prepared, and by that, remember, I mean slept, dressed, and fed, because that's really the main thing you need to provide for them to have a platform for learning. If they go into a new situation fed, dressed, and slept, they can do what they need to do. And if you manage to kind of build up that openness to a new experience, then you really are opening a door. You're opening a door so that your child can have a new experience and have a willingness for more new experiences. So that when they're reintegrating back into school, as Dr. Guger was talking about, and facing a variety of challenges, as they no doubt are, as all kids are, they are at least going in with this spirit of openness and a readiness to experience whatever it is that that day has for them. And as they do what matters in the moment, then they get more and more confident, of course, that they can do what matters when it matters. And if they've had a few times when they've found their way home from school by themselves without their parent hovering, they'll even do it a little bit better. Okay. So I have on these slides, and as you know, you're getting these slides, so you don't need to write anything down. There's lots of resources for you. These parenting textbooks are really good. Excellent. I know the two women that wrote them, and they run a parenting workshop in Victoria, BC, so you can't attend it, although I think it might be spreading. And the books are great. There's a bunch of other books here. I put in the Risk and Resiliency book at the top there. That's the Michael Unger book. A couple really good old ones there. And that's it. Thank you.